I think we are running our show, so let's get our thing on the road here. Open our little clickety clacks. Welcome to the evolution from slightly less hot Spokane. My den is below 90 degrees. I'm going to enjoy it while I can. And there is Troubles in Paradise, TortugaWordPress.com, which is material that is available for everybody to make use of. I don't know whether Jackson will be materializing. Hello. Hi, Scott. Hi. Boop. So we are definitely getting the chat. We'll have an interesting array of material today, from the analysis of replacing Darwin. I'm going to mention a little bit about the ongoing work for the new Rocks Were There book, where we are going to be discussing, among other things, in that Noah's Ark, a feasibility study. Jerry Bergman is going to be raked over the coals. There's going to be funky, fun stuff happening in that new volume that we are working on as we speak. And then later, the other half of the show will also be about the RubisCO molecule and some interesting little material on that thing. We will find out whether Jackson materializes at some point. Hello, Lavender Lady. How you doing? I know you've been kind of up and down in health matters, but every day you're here is one more day that you're here. So keep at it. Keep plugging away. Never underestimate the power of stubbornness. That is a thing that I have learned in my own life as well. Anyway, let me go ahead also and do a little share screeny on the our patrons, our people who have a project, of which Lavender Lady is one. Let me read them all off for everybody. Our colleagues Hendrell, Colton, Eric Rowley, Suris, and Zeshi. Researchers Travis Adams, Ian Chen, Convert Me, Stephen Early, Eat Neil, James Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Apologia, Benjamin Simpson, Speed of Sound, Studio, DM Wing, Assistant Researchers, Command Cyborg, Doranku, Jelly, Todes Real, Christopher Johnson, Friends, Stephen Bauman, Barragale Beddoes, Daniel Insects Are Cool, Lavender Lady in Lavender, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffalopagus, Bo, Hulbo, Rasmussen, Devin Miranda Reeves, Alex Stone, Paul Williams, and at the bottom of the line, legacy patrons, people who helped us at one time or another: Jen, Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew, Dyer, Yui, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Nana, Stagel, Sun, Sky, Stone, Ugly German, Truth, Everett, Vincent, and Sewer, Weisbaum. Every one of you has been wonderful help in helping in one way or another to keep things running amok in the project, which is to not leave any stones unturned for demolishing creationism in all of its stupidity and anything that orbits that realm, and pull together people from a wide variety of disciplines to engage in that pursuit. Plus, it's damned fun. So before we get on to Nathaniel Jeanson, which is basically, he's in one-trick pony mode, I will allude a little bit to ongoing work that's relating to the new book, Volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. If those of you who aren't aware of John Woodmarap's fabulous Noah's Ark, a feasibility study, I say fabulous in the sense of fantastical, unbelievable, implausible. But it's a seminal work from 1996 where he was basically laying out an awful lot of the supposed dynamics of the Ark, and he kind of keeps at some of this stuff. He's done some an assortment of postings since. One that I'm particularly amused at was a 2013 analysis that he did. Oh, and by the way, one thing that doesn't show up at all in Noah's Ark, a feasibility study, or in the more recent stuff on the stress of the wood elements of the Ark, is what the wood is. Gopher wood. What is gopher wood? He doesn't discuss it. It's not even in an index in the 96 book. Lisa for Truth, are you going to mention the eyesore of Ken Ham? Yes, indeed. Well, Ham, the whole point of the Answers in Genesis books is that's Ham's territory. And most of the people that will be criticizing in this new segment here aren't Ken Ham. I mean, it's Bodie Hodge and Nathaniel Jeanson and John Woodmarapp and Sarfati and all the other charming little gang, Andrew Snelling and all the rest. Ham is a relatively trivial player in his own enterprise in the fact that he doesn't really write all that much. He pops along occasionally. We'll be alluding to some of his stuff. I mean, when we're talking about dinosaurs on Noah's Ark, we can't resist bringing up a little bit of Ken Ham on that. But anyway, a thing that I just encountered today with Woodmarapp was the idea that he wants to eschew the idea that he would be doing any speculation regarding the Ark. He says that speculations about the advanced nature of the antediluvian civilization are eschewed in favor of the conservative assumption of simple, unremarkable technologies, like fasteners made out of Damascus steel. He's presuming the Ark had steel fasteners being used for the wood. So anyway, but he's not using any sophisticated technology in doing that. We're going to be looking into all of that. Lisa Perdue says Phoenicians were the premier boat builders and they could only go a few feet offshore. Well, they were more aggressive than that. There's an argument to be made that people of that Bronze Age period got pretty far around. There were trading routes that went all the way up to Cornwall and the tin mines and stuff up in that area. There were quite a substantial amount of trading networks than that went on. But quite right about sailing too far out of sight of land is another matter. The Mediterranean has the advantage of being not a gigantic ocean, and so you have an awful lot of sight-to-sight kind of things. It's not quite as daunting as getting across the Pacific. We know how the Polynesians did that. They were able to use rafts and things, but they were not carrying vast amounts of animals, and they did not have arcs the size of ocean liners. So we've got a lot of the dynamics on there. Dear old Jerry Bergman, I'll give a little teaser about what's going on with Bergman. For those who do not know Jerry Bergman, he is one of the more annoying and persistent of creationists, and has been rattling on for decades and still produces material. Well, he pops up because of the racism angle that Bergman is constantly banging the drum that Darwinian racism is there and race is an evolutionary concept and there's no such thing as any Christian racism, and if they are, then they've been corrupted by evolutionary thinking, and that's the line of argument that he does. And so I've just been analyzing a particular set of material from one of his brand new 2020 articles on Louis Agassiz that finally admits that Agassiz is a flaming racist, but tries to attribute a lot of it to Thomas Huxley and others. And that's a tough sell to come up with. And in some cases, he's very inventive in some of his scholarship, like completely inventing a quote out of thin air from a book. And fortunately, I was able to get the book. And so I could actually document that, no, sorry, Bergman, that statement you just quoted was not in that book at all. So where are you getting this out of your ass? So it's a fun opportunity to deal with here, because it's not as though there hasn't been evolutionary racists, and in fact we'll be discussing some in the book, but it's a vastly more intricate prospect than what the creationists want. And this also connects up, of course, with the Nazism charge and what's his name from the Discovery Institute, Weichert, who's just been banging that drum. We alluded to him a little bit in Volume 1, but it's going to be getting back into that issue about to what extent was Darwin a progenitor of bad ideas, or were there bad ideas knocking around and they were getting along quite nicely without Darwin? So there we're going to have an awful lot of fun. Did Noah send a pigeon and crow so dinosaurs were on the ark? Well, they had a dove too. Remember the dove? And that also connects up with the traditions of the Babylonian and Mesopotamian flood legends about birds being sent out from the ark to find out whether the water was receding and all that kind of stuff. That we'll be covering all of that in Volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. Tales of the Big Slosh is what the chapter is. Anyway, so there's a little bit of the adverts for what we're going to be coming up with for the new book that's going to be filling in the other material that we had to leave out of volume 1. So that between the two, it's going to be quite a mammoth set of documentation. Anyway, our little old pal, Jeanson, as you may have noticed, for those who've been watching the show for quite a at least says, what's the difference between creationism and ID, intelligent design? I called in my tip work, I got a whole chapter on it, the creationism light. Intelligent design is all the dogma without so much more fact. And what the main thing is about intelligent design is it doesn't bother about the age of the earth. It doesn't think about that. They don't think about the flood, any of that stuff. They accept conventional chronology. So life is billions of years old. Please don't bother me about it anymore. And that some things are supposedly irreducibly complex and the origin of information. Those are the main obsessions of intelligent design. Plus, they don't like the idea of speciation much either. And so in some respects, intelligent design has gotten behind the curve where young Earth creation is at least has to grapple with the speciation issue because of the need to put a limited number of critters on board the Ark. Intelligent design doesn't bother about any of that stuff, so they really don't think much about it. And they're a specialized subset. There are very few arguments that are presented in intelligent design that don't show up somewhere in the young Earth creationist dogma. But most of the young Earth creationist dogma spills over into areas, cosmology and geology and all of that, that's way bigger. So little idea is a little teeny pimple, a little teeny subset of the great big young Earth creationist thing. But if you shrink young Earth creationism down to its data field, it's a little small blip, which compared to the gigantic mass of the science data that they're ignoring. Remember, the anti-evolutionists in general are missing about 90% of the data field. And intelligent design is looking at maybe a quarter of the data field that the young Earth creationists deal with. So there we go. Oh, creation myths. Hello, our good old pal, Dan Stern Cardinale, due to the Edwards v. Aguilar Supreme Court decision that outlawed creation science in public schools. Yeah, the Edwards v. Aguilar is a seminal case from the 1980s. By the way, Justice Scalia, the late Justice Scalia, wrote what I regard as one of the stupidest dissents ever in the history of the Supreme Court. And I did an analysis of that, which you can find in one of the tip modules, tip 1.7 no, 1.6, I think, at my website, and download that. Have fun reading through all of that material, because it was just an astonishingly bad, pseudoscientific, scientifically illiterate, head up the ass, idiotic dissent. That is one of the reasons why I had such a relatively low opinion of Justice Scalia all over all those years. And I'm not sure that any of the current bunch of Trump appointees or the Bush appointees would do much better on the science front on there. So anyway, because of that Edwards v. Aguilar case, you've got any overt attempt to put anti-evolution notions in that are biblically based, and like that's basically all of them, slams into that Supreme Court ruling, and it's never been overturned or revised. The intelligent design Dover case in 2004 technically didn't get to the Supreme Court level. It was operating at just a state court level, and that one slammed into the fact that they weren't doing any better than the young Earth creationists in keeping the religion out of it, especially when you started looking at pandas and people and all of that stuff. And there's a bunch of postings that I've got on that at the website and that as well. Lisa for Truth, WTF, is that argument doing in the SC in the 1980s? Yes, that was back in that. There, as far as I know, I don't think there's been any rulings relative to this point since the 1980s, and no cases percolated up through the courts on this stuff. That you still find every year there's some clowns in Arkansas and various states that put an anti-evolution bill in, and they get absolutely nowhere. Some have been even put up in my own state of Washington, but they don't get out committee. So it's just a wacky set of circumstances on it. It didn't come up at all during the Trump years, because Trump is a scientific illiterate. He doesn't care anything about this stuff. And none of it impacts his business if I can assure you, it would have been an issue if there was a matter about making money at Mar-a-Lago, if evolution would go away, then you would have had something about it. But no, he could care less about that part. Creationist, Dover was just a district ruling, and then the creationist school board got booted in the next election, and the case didn't go any further. It was for some reason, a Republican appointed judge didn't like the idea that the people pushing this Pandas and People book had lied about how they had got it and lied under oath. For some reason, that bothered him. What was particularly ironic about the Dover case is that both sides in the case wanted this to be a decisive one. So they both asked that the judge rule about whether intelligent design was scientific or not. And I think the pro-ID people were thinking, hey, a conservative Republican appointee, and we're going to have our big heavy guns come in there. Well, there got to be fewer and fewer heavy guns. Steve Meyer bailed and didn't come in. Bill Dembski bailed. And there was big infights about the two legal teams that were involved, and it was just turning into a mess. So the only one that actually ended up that was kind of a heavy gun there was Michael Behe, and that was not his great glorious moment. I alluded a little bit to Behe's stuff on his discussion of the impepinum resistance case in Evolution Slam Dunk. And then Jackson and I went into considerable detail on the chloroquine case that Behe brought up in his later book, The Edge of Evolution, and we were explaining why that was a pile of dingo's kidneys as an argument. So anyway, there's a little bit of digression on that point. Anybody that looks into this still keeps a monitoring to see who all is an anti-evolutionist in politics, but evolution has never, within my lifetime, very rarely comes up as a really big deal issue. Abortion and political issues and gay marriage, all of that stuff was just hot button ticket items compared to evolution. Even though if you scratch the surface on most of these issues, the people who are really concerned about them also are anti-evolutionists. And this would be true of Tony Perkins, who Family Research Council bunch, and true probably certainly Mike Pence, Mark Meadows, who's a Ken Ham-style creationist that was Trump's chief of staff. You got an awful lot of going around there. So one thing I'd love to see in the future would be reporters to ask methods questions and pin people down on a lot of these things, because often the only time you find out somebody's view on evolution or science or climate science is if they're voting on a bill, and you don't find out about them before they get elected, and it doesn't even get into the primary issues. So these are all methods issues of questions that really ought to be brought up. Without evolution, you wouldn't have your poodle, Karen. Yeah. And Judge Jones, who's lectured quite a bit on it, I think he wrote a book on it. He still knocks around in the matter. He's very sharp and affable, and he has not taken kindly to being dumped on by the Discovery Institute. They were fuming. How dare he? He's offering this evolutionary propaganda. And, no, sorry. This wasn't cut. Anyway, back to the alleged topic of tonight's episode. As you've been watching in the last few weeks, there's been a rut that Jeanson has been in, which is that he's trying to slip some creationism under the wire through the footnotes. So he's been arguing about all these abrupt, super duper fast, accelerated things with geology and that. And the last one that he's just brought up is the one that I've been studying, this last one, which is about magnetic fields. And so Jeanson claims that creation scientists have, quote, successfully predicted the magnetic fields for planets in our own solar system. Bum, bum, bum. And that consisted of a vomit of Russell Humphreys posts from 1984 and 2002 and 2008 and 2011 and 2013. And technically 2021, which kind of surprised me. I go, how does a 2017 book offer a 2021 posting? That's because it was actually about a 1998 letter that Humphreys had written in response to criticism. And apparently it's been like updated since. And so technically it was a 2021. Anyway, those are all going to be links that I'll be sticking into the description in here. What intrigued me about following up on all this is how he's not even wrong. He's irrelevant. because unlike the magnetic decay of the magnetic field of the Earth issue, where there's been some criticism of him from creationism critics over the years, most of his arguments about planetary magnetic fields and the like are just kind of like so. And so he's just irrelevant. There's not even any pushback on him. But one issue that Jeanson just couldn't resist pushing out here was 2 posts from 2007 and 2008, where Humphreys is arguing that there was an anomaly. Well, he didn't argue it. He just exploited it. The Pioneer space probe that went out and is still continuing out into deep space, there was some indication that it seemed to be accelerating in a way that was puzzling. And he immediately pounced on this. Aha! Creation cosmology can explain that. Really? Well, this piqued my curiosity because I was already aware of the fact that this was like a dead letter. 2011, 2012, there was new work where they were realizing that part of it was just a data artifact and part of it involved how the thermal things were radiating inside the object in the power plant and how that was shifting back and forth and how they were calculating how fast it was moving. And remember, we're talking a really small object that's really far away and we're trying to detect it like with radar and all of that. And so just a tiny little amount of number quibbling could make it seem like something anomalous was happening. And so this turned out to be kind of like just an artifact and nobody really bothers a heck of a lot about it today. Well, remember, Jeanson's writing this book in 2017. Why is he relying on all of this stuff from 2007 and 2008 and not bothering about the newer material? Oh, I have a thought. It's because he either doesn't know that there's been new work in this field, or he suppresses that information because it doesn't fit his narrative. You want to take a bet as to which one of those? Either one of those is perfectly plausible. I think it's much more likely that he well knows that how could he have avoided hearing about the various arguments on this front since then? So I think it's highly likely that he just didn't want to let the readers know, because on every single one of these planetary issues, the magnetic field things, he's basically just presenting Humphreys' opinion without any pushback, without any countervailing discussion. It's all just Humphreys. Now, remember, a couple episodes back, it was also Humphreys. And then the next week was Steve Austin. Now we're back to Humphreys. So it turns out the vast majority of his accelerated this and that stuff are the work of 2 people, Steve Austin and Russell Humphreys, neither of whom have set the science house on fire in the regular outside world. Lisa for Truth says Jeanson's more up to date than Kent. Oh, a block of wood is more up to date than Kent. Most of Kent Hovind's arguments cycle material that basically, when he's steeped, whatever is in that head of his congealed, 1980s, 1990s. Basically, when Walt Brown was writing his material down, I think the main edition of his book came out in 2001. That's pretty much Kent Hovind land. And the vast majority of his material is dated from that. Once in a while, he'll pick up more recent crap, usually from unreliable creationist sources that he doesn't bother to identify. Sometimes he does identify them, like Harun Yahya, that I discussed back in 2018. But that's really kind of rare for the course. What is so interesting about the Jeanson argument is how amazingly superficial it is. With these new Humphreys references, 25% of his source citations now are just young Earth creationist screeds. That's a large proportion. I mean, Roop and Sanford did better than that in their book on human evolution. They at least were scavenging around the technical literature and misrepresenting it. But Jeanson is actually pretty shy on the technical literature. And he doesn't do more than, I think there's only one instance of where I cataloged it as an authority quote. So he's effectively just making arguments that are tendentious and marginally documented or not well documented at all, and he's slipping them in the footnotes. So as we work our way up to the meat of the thing, which is all of his big, long chapter 10, where he goes into these various critters that he's arguing all have come about since the flood, where effectively he's arguing an awful lot of speciation going on. It's going to be fun to see how he's making that argument at all and on what basis, because I will have to be going through, that's the advantage of going through source analysis, is to see where is he getting this stuff from. I know he's got some footnotes that have monstrous masses of data nodes in there, and I'm not sure where he's getting them from, and so I'll find out where he's getting them from in due course. So it's a fun little operation on there. Lisa for Truth says, I expected more. No. Well, no, I'll let me rephrase that. Jeanson, after all, does have an actual degree. So yeah, in a way, I expected more. I expected a book with an index. I expected a book with a reference bibliography so you could find out where information was. Even John Woodmorath puts an index in. I mean, that's really rudimentary. So for a work that is seeking to replace Darwin, that can't even figure out how to make information easily accessible so that you can navigate your way through their argument. No, I would have expected more for it. So I have to put Rupp and Sanford, who also lacked a bibliography and an index, and Jeanson in that weird sets low standards and fails to meet them category. Sanford is in a weird world all of himself, but the vast majority of Rupp and Sanford was Rupp, not Sanford, by Sanford's own admission. So most of the material in there was Rupp running around authority quoting and gathering crap up and making tendentious arguments and then repeating the things because there was an awful lot of duplicate referencing in the Ruppy book. This is not the case here. So I'm getting a little bit of reprises of prior argument, but it's in some respects a tighter argument in that he's dribbling out fresh stupid each time rather than reprising the previous stupid and hoping that you you forgot that he did that. So it's a structurally different kind of a little maneuver in there. It's going to be fun to see where Jeanson does or doesn't go with this stuff over the next decade or more. I think he's younger than I am, so he should have a long opportunity to strut his stuff. He's one of those who is accepting transitional forms and going beyond that, in fact, and insisting with a straight face that young Earth creationism has always accepted transitional forms, he says, while we do a spit take. No, but that's his position. And so he's in that blob of the new creationism. That's the evolving form. You see, a little bit of history here. You'd have your old traditional creationists from the 1900s who sometimes they would be old Earth creationists, and some had functionally kind of young Earth views if they were coming out of that Adventist crowd. Then the full-blown young Earth creationism is being developed in the 1960s and 70s, and it hits the fan in the 1980s with the various legal efforts that are going on. And so most of your Duane Gish and your Henry Morris and all that crowd, Gary Parker and all of those, and many of whom have dropped dead in the years since. You know, Henry Morris has died, Duane Gish, and so it's an older generation. Then you get that newer crowd that are coming in. Ken Ham popped out of the middle of nowhere and burbled up to form Answers in Genesis in the 1990s, and that has become the main kid on the block, big enough to put up theme parks and have tons of websites and a bunch of journals and all that. ICR is still operating. The Institute for Creation Research is still kind of operating over in the corner. There's a large amount of overlap between ICR and AIG in modern creationism, and you find a lot of the ones with the PhDs bouncing back and forth between that crowd. Then so your Nathaniel Jensens and Andrew Snellings and that often flit back and forth between AIG and ICR material and CMI. For those who don't remember, Lisa for Truth, James Downer, can I borrow the block of wood? Oh, by all means, yes, indeed. Even though I suppose comparing Kent Hovind to a block of wood is a terrible insult to wood. but it's a price that I'm sure the trees won't mind. They'll be willing to buck up on it. Their bark is worse than their bite. No pun too cheap for me. Anyway, you're getting a mass of the heavy gun PhD people rolling around in the postings at AIG and ICR and CMI. For those who aren't aware, I'll point out, Creation Ministries International was the other half of Answers in Genesis. And there was a bunch of people that didn't like how Ken Ham was running the budget. And they had a big lawsuit with him over it. And basically, they fissioned the two groups off and they separated the kids. So some of the magazines got over at CMI, and that's you can tell who got what by which website the material is on. So some of the creation journals that were run by the old AIG organization end up at CMI, and some of it's at Answers in Genesis. And you can tell who got the custody of all of that. Now you're getting a new generation. I know the Institute for Creation Research has been very pesky about the fact that there's an awful lot of old farts that are as old as I am. And they are very anxious to get a new breed of young people involved in the 40 or younger range. And there's a bit of it, but whether or not they're being very successful at it, from their point of view, in their public pronouncements, boy, they stick nice, happy, smiling face young people on there all the time to give the impression that they're a younger bunch than they are. In some cases, I think Jonathan Sarfati, who is probably as old as I am and looks like a desiccated frog like me, he never puts his pictures up of what he looks like now. I go with what I am. I have no delusions about that, but he always puts pictures that make him look much younger than he actually is. And I think the same is true for John Woodmarapp, although he doesn't tend to put pictures up of himself at all. That's not his even real name. But Lavender Lady Comfort is Living Waters. Isn't ICR Ray Comfort? No. Ray Comfort is his own little separate organization, and he's really way below the ICR level of analysis. Nobody is ever going to accuse Ray Comfort of a propensity to read detailed science material, even from creationists. So he riffs off of Carl Kirby, and he's sort of over in a corner, but operationally not dissimilar to what a Kent Hovind does. Or for that matter, a Ken Ham without the organization. So he's relatively superficial, very limited in his output, not very prolific. He's relatively few books, and what books he comes out with are not festooned with detail. He's just not a heavy-duty player in here. I don't think he knows any more about this subject than, say, Kirk Cameron does, who's also associated with Ray Comfort. But Comfort would give the impression, because he's written a couple more books than Kirk, of being a loftier and older mentor. But methodologically, they're both just bargain basements. And they don't get close enough to the data field to really bother. Kent Hovind, at least, grapples with specific issues. They're usually the same issues he's been grappling with for decades. But Comfort and crowd don't get that close. And in some respects, Ken Ham doesn't get that close because he doesn't seem to be terribly closely aware of what his own organization does. I think whether or not he wafts into meetings once in a while and somebody will give him like a memo. I don't know how this even works to explain what's going on at Answers Research Journal and all of that. I don't think anybody's actually explored to what extent Ken has much of a hands-on familiarity with the output of his own organization. But from his point of view, he doesn't really care. The money rolls in, and he can allocate what he likes to do with all that money. He pulls in about 150 grand plus perks at Answers in Genesis, so I don't think he bothers all that much about what the content is, so long as it's doctrinally pure. And they do maintain, I'm sure, there are little boffins that probably make sure that everything that shows up at Answers in Genesis, whether it's on any of the magazines or the technical journals or whatever, is all matches the official dogma. Now, that dogma isn't necessarily quite the same as Institute for Creation Research. So AIG people are much more open to natural selection as a thing within the created kinds, as opposed to Randy Gugliuzza over at Institute for Creation Research, that he just stamps his foot and holds his breath till he's blue, insisting that, nope, natural selection is not a thing. And so we alluded to it in volume 1 of The Rocks Were There, the little back and forth on that. Oh, yes, how Lisa for Truth. Yes, Ken Ham does kind of look like either a Mormon patriarch or one of the stand-ins at Planet of the Apes. It's hard to figure out quite which one's which at time, especially with those little mutton chop things and all that he has on there. One thing that Ken Ham and Comfort and may have confused a lot of people is that both of them are from Australia world. So they've got the twangy accent from that world. They're not, they're immigrants coming over here and bringing their stupidity with them. As opposed, and that's one of the reasons why CMI has a slightly different international mix. The original Australian Answers in Genesis bunch became the core group of the CMI operation. So there's still an awful lot of Australians knocking around in that cluster. And then there are little tendrils around the world that connect up with that. ICR, they go on little lecture tours to regale creationists around the world. There are translations of various books that are done, and so they want to put things into like Polish and various others, conservative Catholics and things in that world. So they downplayed the kind of doctrinal thing. The same thing happens with the Discovery Institute, where they want to make sure that the various Discovery Institute works are available in Polish and Hungarian and other things so that they can infiltrate that viewpoint. Brazil, that's another area where the Discovery Institute has been doing outreach. I don't know that it's been horribly successful. I think if you probably gathered together. Oh, thank you, Lavender. Yes, Comfort is from New Zealand. I knew it was fun of those Australian, New Zealand, twangy didgeridoo clusters. New Zealand is right next door, you know. That's also where the hobbits come from. So now that we can make it all clear, we'll know all the little details on that whole point. But Comfort is, I only really started encountering some of these characters as a consequence of doing research on the TIP project, because a lot of them fly way below the radar. A lot of them don't write many books. A lot of them are just lecturers. Kent Hovind is primarily a video lecturer, and minus the 10 years he was in jail, you know, that slowed him down a little bit. Eric Hovind operates in the same way, that they make videos. They're using the visuals. You've got the book, and as we can tell, merely writing a book is not necessarily an indication that they have any better thinking. Now, to be fair, Jeanson is operating at a vastly more sophisticated level than Standing for Truth and little Ramat, his partners in crime, that write exactly the way they talk, and that is not a compliment, and think that you put in hyperlinks into a book text just as if they were basically doing blogs and all of that. It's just hilarious. Australia can have Ham back. Oh, I'd love to give him back. Yes, unfortunately, that's not how things work on here. Lisa for Truth have no patience with stupidity, especially coming from that world. Yeah, as a methodologist mind, that's the thing that offends me about this, is there's a great deal of laziness. There's a great deal of willful ignorance, because remember, if I can find this material, so can they. And that's why the source methods analysis can be so revealing, because you can discover what the source must have known about because they cited it. And when you discover that the source doesn't say what they claim it does, like I was just finding with Bergman inventing a quote out of thin air, or it misrepresenting the content of it to serve purposes like that, and discover that there's a pattern of behavior where functionally all of them do that. There are practically, they're so hard to find an honest creationist in that respect. Todd Wood and Kavanaugh come up as probably the easiest in that regard. Where they're still doctrinal creationists, but they do play a little fairer with some of their arguments. But even Wood, I can see him suppressing information. Kurt Wise, another one, where you have to go, what's going on in here? So it's all a methodological thing. Now, the other part of the show relates to a little minor detail that kind of popped up along the slide. The PBS a ways back had done a thing on the elements of life, and they happened to be bringing up the eccentricities of the RubisCO protein in biology, and it relates to the photosynthetic system. It's an intriguing one, and its origins are not pinned down. And so I was thinking, okay, I bet anything that's not pinned down yet is going to theoretically be an object for creationists. Where's this coming from? And it turns out to be exactly the case. Yeah. It turns out that Matthew Serhati had done a piece in 2020 about RubisCO and mysteries surrounding it. But it's not as though there isn't work on the subject. And so I'm going to be putting in a link not only to that Serhati creationist piece, but to a 2007 paper by Tabita on the RubisCO-like proteins. And so that's one of those that for the origin of photosynthetic systems and for a lot of the biology that's going on in either at the LUCA level or maybe even earlier, molecules like RubisCO are sufficiently interesting to figure out what they might be doing independent of what they're doing now. How might they have originated? What biological lessons are they indicating for us to get from a hypothetical precursor function to the systems that we end up with that are locked in place as biology? So I would put that one down as keep a little tag on that and follow up on the research. So that means that now for me, the way I do research then is anything that's related to RubisCO, the RubisCO that pops up in the technical literature is going to flag my attention to see whether or not I'm going to be adding it into the TIP data field to find out where the research is heading and who the players are doing all of that research. We will be pretty clear that whoever the players are in the research area, it won't be any of the creationists. It won't be intelligent designers. It won't be young Earth creationists. They're not going to be off in a corner. Yeah. How about we found a nation called YEC land and send them all there? That would be so nice. I would like to maybe we could send them all to Venus, and we could make Donald Trump the first ambassador to Venus. Do you think he'd accept the job on there? Tell him that there's an awful lot. Anybody that goes there, there's going to be an awful lot of hot chicks there because the temperature is 900 degrees, so everything is hot there. And we'll may or may not give them proper air conditioning and all that. Ice, a lot of ice and all that. But we'll see about that. Although it is a terrible thing to wish upon poor Venus. But Mars, we might actually want to go to Mars and live. So let's not give that to Trump. Let's put him in a nice place where, and also the similarity with hell, I think would be a nice thing that would be appropriate for the creationists and that to go to. Once in a while, you get some references from the creationists about Venus. I don't think any of them really think too much about, we should send them on a night flight to Venus. Yes. Well, that's why you go to the sun. You go at night. And it's not a problem. But Venus is a really intriguing area. It pops up in some of the recent discussion because there was some speculation that there might be some kind of weird bacteria life living up in the upper clouds because there were apparently some little molecules and things that were being detected that normally would be coming from living systems. And an awful lot of scientists are going, yeah, probably not. So there's been a lot of water dumped on that little bit. But Venus is such a weird hellhole, hard to explore. You send a probe down there and you better make it sturdy because it's only going to be down there for like a minute or two before it's fried, roasted, dissolved, acidified, and that's the end of that. So it's extremely difficult. It's high pressure environment. It's incredibly hot. It's acidic, 900 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,000 atmospheres or some such thing. It's a ridiculous 100 atmospheres, something. It's like at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean in terms of pressure. It's just icky. The interesting thing from a planetary development point of view is why did it end up that way? And was it that way to begin with? And how quickly did that happen? And so the argument that I've seen is that the major factor is that it's closer to the sun than the Earth. And it's about the same size as the Earth. So whither, but for the grace of orbit, might have gone us. We were far enough away from the sun. The sun would have been a little cooler to begin with. And then as the sun warmed up, our systems began to compensate homeostatically for it because living systems were already really well developed. The interesting question would have been, to what extent was life developing on Mars and Earth and Venus? And ours is the only one that took because we were in the little Goldilocks zone. Or did life develop at all on either of these other places? And the difficulty of determining that for Venus is that the odds of finding fossils there that haven't been fried to smithereens, extremely remote. Plus, how do you even get down there to look because it's such a murky, hot house environment? Your self-cleaning oven would be a winter resort on Venus. So that gives you some sense about what the hell's going on there. Don Giovanni says Da Vinci is going to land. Haven't done that since the Soviets. Yeah, their probe only lasted a short while too. It was built like a tank, as I remember, and it gathered in what data they could, took a few pictures, sent a few things back, and then that's the end of that. So it is, of all the places in the solar system, probably one of the most inhospitable to go to. A different set of circumstances for, say, Jupiter, because of, and any of the Galilean satellites apart from, I think Callisto is the only one that's outside of the Fryer balls off magnetic radioactive radiation fields around Jupiter. So that has a different set of circumstances. And then, of course, the farther out you go, you're into ice ball land. So it's difficult to get out there and time consuming, so that you make a probe to go there, and it's going to be like 10 years before you can get it out there because it's so far. So anyway, yes, Michael Apple says Venera. Yeah, yes, that's the ancient days. That's when the Soviet Union was busy doing more than they are doing now in a lot of that area. In fact, I would expect to see more busy work from like the Chinese and that are really flexing their muscles just for propaganda purposes. They've already sent a little rover around to Mars. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're doing stuff in that area. And then the little odd player, India likes to have a little bit of a space program, their foot in the door in that as well. So all you kids out there that are going to be living farther into the 21st century, assuming we older people haven't screwed it up for you, will have some opportunities, presumably, to learn more about our other little planets around there. Venus is also interesting. It's a planet that doesn't have any moons. Back when I was growing up, that was interesting. Mercury doesn't have any moons. Venus doesn't. And then you start getting one moon and then two dinky ones with Mars. And then the mysterious asteroid belt that was initially thought maybe a disintegrated planet. It turns out the mass of it is really not enough to do that. And then the monster planets that turned out to have way more moons than we thought they did. Once we started sending probes out there, they started climbing. I think Saturn has more than you can shake a stick at. They run out of names for the damn things. Lisa for Truth, I love science. I do too. I'm absolutely delighted, and which is another reason why it's pissing annoying to see creation as so stupid. How dare you believe in claptrap when we have so much actual knowledge out there, and it's easily accessible. And you can communicate with the scientists and see their reports on NOVA, and you can read the technical literature freebie, and we can discover all these wonderful things. You have no excuse for believing stupid shit. And the pomposity of somebody like Raw Matt or Matt Powell or Standing for Truth, who regale us with the same stuff, Nephilim free, and that people that operate at that bargain basement secondary source attic level are just is wasting so much time, that there's so much fabulous material to learn about that it's exhausting to keep track of it all, especially because in the go after the creationism issue, so many issues come up, which is why I've always recommended on the show that anybody who wants to get into this particular niche, find an area that you really like and then specialize in it, and then become generally familiar and connect up with other people who may be specialists so that you can get the main grip on things without necessarily having to dive in every single bloody discipline. In my own research here, I keep track of, I have information from thousands of journals. And I guarantee you it's physically impossible to keep track of the current output of every one of those bloody journals. There's just not enough time in the day to do that. So I will go after certain linchpin areas, and then I have a network of people in Twitter land that I can see incoming information that I wouldn't have known about because I would have had to hunt it around for it, but they're experts in the field, so they're calling it to your attention. So that speeds up the process enormously. Michael says, why you see in flat earthers are more a matter of degree. Methodologically, you're absolutely right that there's not a dime's worth of difference. There's a spectrum where you've got flat earth is largely a subset of geocentrism. That's a subset of young earth creationism. That's a subset of a generic anti-evolutionism. That's a subset of the, here's how you get to have your head up your ass, bad way of thinking that spills over into a lot of different areas. And what they all have in common is an easy addiction to secondary sources. We laid all of this out in volume 1 of The Rocks Were There, and I've been using it in all of the works, that you've got core cognitive problems that are independent of the content. They're easily addicted to secondary sources that they don't fact check, that their source base is really limited, so it's a small number of people they're copying from. Anti-vaxxers, the 65% of all the anti-vax material is coming from only about a dozen people. Things like that. There's only about a dozen intelligent design core advocates, and then another 40 some odd young earth creationists. So you've got maybe 60, 70 people. That's the entire core data field generators at the anti-evolution biz currently. That's not a lot of people. You can get them into a room at a Holiday Inn. In a meeting room, it's not a heck of a lot of people, as opposed to the tens of thousands of scientists that are directly involved in writing the technical literature and in various specialties. Now, individual topics may have a small cluster of people that are the main players. There's probably now 40 or 50 people on the planet who are actively engaged in origin of life research, for example, and a smaller cluster of maybe a dozen people that are the big movers and players, and then there's teams floating around in that bunch, that kind of thing. But other areas will have just zillions of ones, paleontology, geology, anthropology, and all of that. That's why you have big conventions, and that's why you have lots and lots of journals about things and all that. Lisa really hates anti-vaxxers, but I guess right now we can get rid of a lot of stupid people that way. Yes, if there is ever one of a thing where certain people are actively angling for the Darwin Award, anti-vaxxers are it. And to the extent that smart people have gotten vaccinated, I have, that reduces our amenability to it. And it's a horrifying thing to say that the anti-vaxxers are just screwing their own demographics, that you're going to have fewer Trumpistas and fewer anti-vaxxers nicking along the line. Some will wiggle through, but that's an awful thing to go through. Pandemics can upset things in a variety of ways. We know that there was a tremendous disequilibration of Europe because of the Black Death, and it had some weird long-term effects. For one thing, a lot of wills had to be written up, and so the paper-making process changed as people and inheritance and various deeds and stuff. There was a big cottage industry in that. Card games spread like wildfire. People had needed some fun after all those deaths. So there's a whole massive tendrils of things. Who owned what changed when you killed off a third of the population. And so it altered the demographic mix of property and all that stuff. I would not recommend starting a pandemic just to stir things up and see what happens, because it was not an instantaneous beeline from the 14th century into the Renaissance and into the development of science. And it was hardly a done deal that if certain people had dropped dead, you might not have done that or delayed that even longer. So if you're planning on taking up a career as a macro theoretician manipulating society, probably skip that, assuming you even think you have the capacity to do that. Michael, it's putting up a little note there. 30 to 40% excess mortality for the 14th century. COVID isn't quite in that ballpark. Oh, absolutely. Yes, you're quite right. COVID is a teeny little tiny player that runs in a range that's not even as big of a killer as the Spanish influenza was. Where it was difficult to deal with had to do with how easily it was caught and how asymptomatic it could be. This was very different and a different demographic. COVID was, at least in the older strain, was effectively hitting old people more than young people. That was the opposite of the Spanish influenza, where it was hitting younger people more directly than older ones. And the other factor was the speed of the influenza. There would be examples of people who were perfectly healthy when they went off to work in the morning and they were dead that night. Whereas there was kind of a lingering mess as you suddenly spiraled into the need for ventilation in the COVID case. And the fact that COVID, what scares the shit out of epidemiologists is the prospect that COVID was relatively easy to spread because it was asymptomatic in most people. So a traveler could have it and be breathing, not even coughing, on other people as they fly in their jet thousands of miles and land at the airport. And by the time it has started to spread around, already the idea, well, you just put a brake on Chinese coming into the country. No, sorry, barn door already open, barn burning down, move past that. So that's another factor about the relative ease of this new variant, and that it's easier to spread among younger people. Now, whether its fatality rate is any different or all that, we'll go find out. But mutations happen. So these absolute ignoramuses who insist on not getting vaccinated are not doing themselves or anybody they know any benefit. But if you have a mind that thinks like that, probably no amount of argument is going to be able to persuade them. Just as there were people back in my mom's day, she lived through the Spanish flu and remembered it very vividly, that the idiots of those days weren't able to figure this stuff out either. So there we go. There's our anti-vax rant for the day. Where are we? 7:57. We got that's an excellent point, Michael. That imagine a variant of something that is as easily caught as a COVID, but as deadly as one of these earlier ones. And there's always a dynamic balance. There's a higher level meta structure to diseases that it's not in the long-term interest of a disease organism or a virus to kill off its host. It doesn't mind if the host drops dead, but it wants the host to spread to the other ones. And if it kills off the entire host too quickly, you've just screwed yourself out of an infection vector. So there's actually a dynamic, and there are people who model all of these things in terms of evolutionary dynamics of how diseases, there's a certain degree to which over the long run, it favors a milder form of the disease that can spread effectively, but doesn't necessarily kill off the host. And that's one of the things we've tolerated with the general flu. That thousands of people drop dead every year from it, but we're kind of used to it, and you can get the vaccine and blah, blah, blah. And in most cases is relatively mild, and we just kind of get used to it, like 50,000 people getting killed in cars every year and so many people getting blown up with guns every year, and we just kind of inured to it. But the difficulties with pandemics are that they can break the rules of a little teeny virus that's been in an environment that has been kept in check because it would kill off its host too easily. but it has a great longevity. And then suddenly finds that person who walks through in a tourism thing and is on a plane to New Zealand in 10 minutes. That scares the shit out of every epidemiologist. And that's why the planning for the pandemics that were being done before the Trump administration pulled the plug on them was a serious effort to deal with it. And Bolton, don't forget, Bolton, dumb brass Bolton, pulled the plug on that, and Trump went along with that. Why we don't need to have any of that planning stuff. This is not difficulty. I can bullshit and lie my way around all of that. Well, 600,000 dead later, no, you can't. And that's not how things work. So, I think that will pretty much cover all of there. Oh, there's a link between the Black Death and HIV. I'm not, that could well be very, I haven't heard that angle. HIV is a different kind of virus. I think that there's an extent to which they're in the same superfamily, something like that. So they're related in a genealogical sense, if memory serves me. And anybody that knows more about the epidemiology of it, let me know in exact. But so they're classed in the same groupings together, in the same way that COVID is classed in the same grouping as these other viruses. But structurally, viruses are intriguing. They look like little industrial machines, and they got little spikes and crap on them, and they got little injectors. Some of them are really quite weird looking and look like the sort of thing that if you were going to talk about intelligent design, some of the viral systems look like a machine. Well, that's a cruel designer. That's a creepy designer. Is this somebody from Hydra doing the designing of these things? No, be wary of attributing these kind of things to design. So we're at 8 o'clock. Any final questions on the show here from the exciting world of roughly 90 degrees Den in Spokane? Slade, my state had 75 road deaths last year. As we get more self-driving cars and new technologies in that area, it'll be intriguing to see what the long-term effect will be about car accidents and other things in terms of insurance rates. And there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here. The 21st century is going to be interesting. I just don't want it to be too interesting. And I want it to have fewer stupid people in charge, fewer Tortukans in positions of authority. We know that's not a good idea. And it doesn't matter what country you happen to have. If you have Tortukan minds that are running the machinery of government, they tend to gum things up. And we can't afford that. The world is too valuable and the future is too important to do that. So there we go. We'll tell everybody, if you haven't been vaccinated, get vaccinated. Stay safe, everybody. Don't accept any wooden penguins. Keep researching. Keep studying stuff. Enjoy the fascinating world of science. It's so neat and interesting. And we will see you all, kids, next week. Bye-bye. Oh, before I go bye-bye, let me put my commercial up for the Roxford there. That's what I forgot to do. Since we now have an actual blurb here, I will end with that as my operation, our commercial for Jackson and our book, of which we are working on volume 2. And because we apparently get sound now, I will recognize that. Available at the old Amazon. You can get it for your Kindle reader. You can get it for the hard copy. We're very proud of the book. It makes a great giant paperweight because it's quite long. It has thousands of sources, beautifully documented. It's informative, funny. You will discover amazingly stupid things that people actually believe and why they're stupid, and you'll get a bit of a laugh out of it, and then also a little bit of a cry as you realize, yikes, there are people who believe some of this shit. So the rocks are there, volume 1, and if you are also of the mind, acquire my previous book, which you can also get there, which is Evolution Slam Dunk. And then if you like some fiction, I've got the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg that you can get to, and I'm nearing completion on the second volume, of which will eventually be a whole series of those. So there's plenty of things to put bookshelves on your books and learn stuff and have fun and annoy creationists by the information you present. So see you.